I stumbled across the link on a Craigslist psych discussion forum. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just killing time scrolling through threads on lucid dreaming and conspiracies about subliminal messaging. And then I saw the post. Live feed, smiling man, watch if you dare. It had a single link, no description, and a sense of weirdness that kind of pulled me in, and against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The stream loaded quickly, revealing a man sitting in a plain wooden chair in the middle of an empty room, and the lighting was flat and harsh, giving the whole scene a very clinical vibe. He was staring directly at the camera, unblinking, with the kind of smile you'd expect from someone trying too hard in a family photo. It wasn't quite unsettling at first, it was just kind of strange, and I waited for him to do something. A wave, a twitch, a shift in his seat, anything. But he didn't. He just sat there, his wide eyes locked on the lens, his lips frozen in that eerie grin, and I checked the timestamp. It was live. I remember thinking, well, this is weird, while glancing at the chat window. It was empty, no viewers except for me, and curiosity kept me from watching. Now 5 minutes turned into 10, and then 20. He didn't move once. No blinking, no fidgeting, nothing. It was like he was frozen in time except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. The longer I stared, the more unnatural it felt, as if he were daring me to keep looking. And then suddenly, I heard a noise. At first I thought it was my imagination, but it grew louder, a faint creak like footsteps on old wood. But the man didn't react. The sound got louder, footsteps echoing faintly in the stream, coming from somewhere out of view. A shadow flickered across the far wall of the room and my stomach tightened. Someone was there. Someone else. I leaned closer to the screen and my pulse was quickening. A figure appeared, blurry at first, and then cleared as they moved cautiously into the frame. It was a man, dressed in dark clothes, wearing a ski mask, and he was holding a sledgehammer. The intruder didn't seem to notice the live camera at first. He glanced around the room, gripping the hammer tightly, and then froze when his eyes landed on the smiling man. But that man, he didn't move an inch. His grin didn't falter and his gaze didn't shift. The intruder hesitated, his posture stiffening. He took a step closer, waved a hand in front of the smiling man's face. Nothing. And then he whispered something, low enough that I couldn't make it out. The smiling man stayed silent, and he didn't even blink. The intruder backed away slowly, muttering to himself, and then turned and bolted out of the frame. I heard the sound of a door slamming shut somewhere off-screen, and for a moment the room was quiet again, except for the faint hum of the camera. The man didn't so much as flinch. I closed the tab, but the image of his frozen, smiling face stayed with me long after. I never went back to that stream, but sometimes I wonder how many people have found it since, and who's really watching who. I met him through a Craigslist personals ad. His posts weren't anything fancy, just kind of awkward and sweet, and it said something like, looking for someone to grab a drink with, laugh a little, and see where it goes. And it caught my attention because it felt real. And we started swapping emails, and he came off as funny and kind, maybe a little rough around the edges, but not really in a bad way. Then, after a week of chatting, we agreed to meet up in person. The bar was crowded, but we found a quiet corner to sit and talk, and right away, I noticed that he had this natural charm about him. He was funnier and way more engaging in person than I expected. He made me laugh, and the way he listened and responded made it feel like he'd be a great listener and maybe at some point in the future, a very attentive boyfriend. And as the night went on, he suggested heading to a nearby pool hall so we could continue enjoying one another's company. And I thought, why not? I had driven, so I offered to take him there. At the pool hall, we played a few games and the conversation kept flowing. He made me laugh, so much so that I almost forgot that we'd only just met. And then suddenly, his phone buzzed on the table and he looked at the screen and His face sort of dropped, and then everything changed. "I need to tell you something," he said. And I froze, not really sure what was coming. "I'm a convicted felon, and I just got out of prison." And my mind started spinning. I didn't even have time to process that before he said, "And I have a girlfriend. I live with her, but it's not serious. I'm just staying there until I get back on my feet." And I was completely blindsided. This man, who had been charming and funny all evening, had just thrown all of this at me like it was no big deal. Then he added one more thing. "She just texted me. She walked into the bar earlier and saw us together, and she knows I'm with you." In that moment, I knew the date was over. I wanted to get out of there, but I'd driven us, and I didn't feel right just leaving him stranded. I told him that I'd take him back to his car, but the vibe on the drive was completely tense and uncomfortable. And as we drove, the alcohol must have really hit him because he started crying. Just quiet tears at first, but then it turned into full-on sobbing. He kept apologizing over and over, saying how much he regretted everything, and I didn't know what to say. And then out of nowhere, he reached for the car door handle. And a panic rose up inside of me, and I yelled, "We're on the goddamn highway!" And he didn't seem to care. He was crying so hard, and it was like he wasn't even hearing me. And I hit the child locks as fast as I could. I yelled at him, trying to stay calm, but inside I was terrified. I didn't know what he was going to do next. The rest of the drive felt like it took forever, and he kept mumbling and crying, and I just focused on getting us back to the bar as fast as possible. When we finally got there, I let him out and watched him stumble to his car, and as soon as he was out of sight, I just drove away as fast as I could. I thought that was the end of it, but a few days later I got a message from an unknown number. It was his girlfriend, and my stomach dropped. She sent pictures of her face, bruised and swollen with a split lip, and she told me he'd beaten her up after our date. She'd confronted him about seeing me, and that's how he reacted, and I felt sick. This man who had made me laugh and seemed so sweet at first was a violent monster. I couldn't believe that I'd spent an entire evening with him, laughing and having fun, all while being completely unaware of what he was capable of. His soon-to-be ex-girlfriend and I started talking more and more after that, and she told me all about the things he'd done to her, and it was horrifying. Then not long after, she left him for good, and we actually became friends. It's strange how something so terrible can lead to something good, but I guess that's life. And that night changed me. I learned to trust my gut and pay attention to those red flags. If something feels off, it probably is. And looking back, I can't believe how close I came to being another one of his victims, and it serves as a reminder to be careful and to never underestimate what someone is capable of.
So this happened a few years ago, but it stuck with me because of how weird and scary it was. So every year for the past few years, my parents have been going on a week-long anniversary trip, leaving me home alone. I was 20, so it was more than an appropriate age. Well, this time around, some weird crap happened the first day that they were gone, and then this happened the night before they were supposed to come home. The first day they were gone, a guy came to the door to drop something off in the morning, but I didn't want to answer it as it was a stranger and I thought he'd just leave it at the door like usual. Well, he stayed for about 5 minutes and then got in his car and started to drive off, to which I then went outside because I thought he had finally left it. This man got out of his car, leaving it in the middle of the road just to give me my package that I didn't have to sign for at all. No signature needed or anything. Wasn't dressed like a delivery person, was in a beat-up car, very weird and uncomfy. Skipping to the end of the week. I was just chilling out in my living room and all of a sudden at 11 at night, I see this rather large figure approach my front door. The glass is dimpled so you can't see the features but just a silhouette. The figure starts banging on my door and then did so for like a minute straight. He just stands there and doesn't leave for probably 10 minutes. And in that time beats on the door a few times over. Luckily, my sister and her family live not even a mile away from me, so I called them and then her husband came to get me. By this time, I'm in full panic mode and I realize that my dogs are in the backyard. My back door is 90% glass, and I was horrified that this person was going to come through the back gate to try and come into my house as my dogs were barking up a storm. Anyways, I got my dogs inside the house and my brother-in-law finally showed up, and whoever was there was gone. He takes me to my sister's house and we check the front door cameras to see who was there. The cameras had been turned off the whole time this person was there, and for an hour before that he had started banging on my door. The cameras had been on before that time period and during the time we were looking at the cameras. They were somehow shut off for about an hour and a half, which was odd because they're not the type that needs to be charged, and they had never glitched before then but were actually very sensitive. To this day, I don't know who it was that showed up at the house. I checked the local news and everything, but nothing ever came of it. I don't know if they were trying to rob my house or if they had other plans, or if it was potentially the delivery guy from earlier that week. But it still freaks me out to think about, and I hate being home alone at night because of it.
Back when I was younger, a little reckless and eager to find love, I thought it'd be a great idea to check out the personal section on Craigslist. Most of the ads I saw were either blatantly fake or downright creepy, but after scrolling for a while, one caught my eye. It was very short and straightforward. Looking for something casual, just broke up with my boyfriend, don't want anything serious, message me if you're interested. Something about it seemed genuine and the attached photo sealed the deal. And this girl was gorgeous, like sort of way out of my league, so I decided that I'd send her a message. She replied almost immediately and things moved fast, really fast, and within a few exchanges she was sending provocative pictures. And I really couldn't believe my luck, but something felt off, like it was way too good to be true. Now half joking, I sent her a message, if this is real, send me a picture with my name written on a piece of paper. And to my shock she did, and that was really all the proof I needed to know that she was real. We kept talking, and she told me that she wasn't looking for anything serious, just a no-strings-attached hookup. Her ex had just moved out, and she wasn't ready for a relationship. She just wanted to have some fun. She then gave me her address and told me to come over. And to make sure everything was legit, I called her, and she answered on the first ring, and her voice was just as alluring as her photos. She said that she was at home, waiting for me. It all felt like a dream that I was going to wake up from at any second, but it wasn't. It was real. When I pulled up to that address, it was a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house looked normal, with a nearly trim lawn and a long driveway. I called her again to let her know that I was there. No answer. I tried again, and still nothing. I started to feel uneasy, but I was convincing myself that I was overthinking. Maybe she was just in the bathroom or had stepped away from her phone. Trying to shake off the nerves, I got out of the car and walked toward the house, and that's when I saw them. 2 men were standing in the window, staring me down as I walked up the driveway. They each looked extremely sketchy, like they'd stepped straight out of a police lineup, and one had a shaved head and a sort of scowl, while the other was very wiry, with tattoos covering his arms. And my blood immediately ran cold. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out of there, and without a second thought, I turned and sprinted back to my car. My heart pounded as I jumped in, locked the doors, and just sped off. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see them chasing after me. When I finally got home, I tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, and maybe those guys had nothing to do with her. But deep down, I knew better. About an hour later, I got a text from the girl. "You're a loser," it read. "That was my boyfriend, and we were just messing with you." I stared at the message, feeling a mix of anger and relief. So much for the ex part, right? And I tried to brush it off as some sick joke, and they probably got a kick out of scaring guys like me. It was messed up, sure, but at least I was okay, I guess. But a few days later, the local news told a much darker story. A man had answered a Craigslist ad in that same neighborhood, and when he showed up, 2 men ambushed him. They beat him, robbed him, and left him barely alive, and he ended up in the hospital fighting for his life. The police said it was a setup, and in the description of the house matched the one that I had been at, and a very cold chill ran down my spine. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to being their victim. If I hadn't noticed those guys in the window, I might not have made it out, and the thought haunted me for a while. These weren't just pranksters messing around. They were predators, willing to hurt someone for a quick payday. They lured me in with fake promises and a pretty face, and I'd almost fallen for it. Even now I can't shake the memory, the way those men stared at me, unblinking, as if I'd already been caught in their trap, and the relief that I felt when I drove away was replaced by a very sickening realization. I'd been extremely lucky. The man on the news wasn't so fortunate, and I can't help but wonder how many had fallen for that exact same trap. Way back before I moved out of my parents' place, my little cousin spilled Mountain Dew all over my PlayStation and just totally fried the thing. A few hours later, I was scrolling my local Craigslist when, bingo, I see a PS3 for sale for $100. The post said it was in good condition, and the seller claimed that he needed the money urgently. It seemed too good to be true, but since it was the holidays and everywhere was mostly snowed in, I was bored out of my mind, and I was desperate. I texted the number listed, and the seller replied quickly, suggesting that we meet in the parking lot of a closed-down Kmart on the edge of town. He insisted on cash and stressed the need for a quick transaction because he didn't want to be sitting in his car freezing his butt off. I felt uneasy. I told myself that I'd be careful. As long as I saw the PlayStation 3 before handing over the money, I figured I'd be fine. When I pulled into the lot, it was completely empty, aside from the dark car parked at the far end, and a man in a hoodie leaned against the driver's door. He raised a hand in acknowledgement as I approached, and then asked if I had the cash. His tone was casual, almost bored, so it didn't raise any red flags at all for me. I nodded, and then he motioned toward the backseat of his car, saying the PlayStation 3 was there and inviting me to check it out. I stepped out of my car, walked towards his, and then opened the back door. Inside was a box, but something was off. It wasn't sealed, and when I lifted the lid, it wasn't a PlayStation 3. Instead, it was an old, dusty console that looked like it hadn't worked in years. And before I could react, I sensed the guy stepping closer behind me. Then out of nowhere, he pulls a gun from his waistband and tells me to hand over the cash, or I'm dead. The whole time his voice was low and controlled, and he didn't sound remotely nervous. But I felt like I was about to piss my pants as I reached for the envelope in my pocket. As I turned to hand it over, I caught sight of another person in the driver's seat of his car, crouched low and watching very intently. This wasn't just a bad deal. It was a straight-up setup. And when that hit me, it hit me like a punch in the face. I had this gut feeling that they weren't about to let me leave and that the guy's next command was going to be for me to get into his car. Instead of just handing over the money and staying put, I tossed the envelope into the car, then instinctually just bailed. I threw the cash in the hopes they'd be happy with their $100, but then, looking back on it, who robs someone for just $100? They didn't want the money. They wanted me. And from what they did next, I'm not sure if they cared if I was dead or alive. The first gunshot cracked the air behind me, and then the asphalt kicked up near my feet. I didn't waste a second. I dove from my car, fumbling with my door handle until a second shot followed, louder and sharper and shattering my rear window. I finally got the door closed, started the engine, and then just stomped on the gas, tires screeching as I peeled out of the parking lot as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel. When I finally made it home, I locked all the doors and sat in the dark for hours, trying to shake off the shock. The shattered glass in my back seat was a grim reminder of just how close I'd come to something far worse, a near miss that could have ended much differently.